You're listening to The Creative Imposter. I'm your host, Andrea Klunder. Let me ask you something. Have you ever had a colleague, someone in your industry, with whom you didn't exactly work, but you felt like you knew them because they traveled in overlapping circles, did work that you admired, and had mutual friends? Maybe you'd even seen them give a talk or listened to hours of their podcast or read things they'd written. Maybe you'd even presented on the very same stage. But you had never actually gotten a chance to sit down one-on-one and gotten to know them. That's my story with today's guest, Mary Chan. Mary is a podcast strategist, voice coach, and voiceover artist. She launches and edits podcasts for business professionals. She's the founder of Organized Sound Productions and producer and host of The Podcaster's Guide to a Visible Voice. Getting Mary all to myself for a little over an hour for the very first time felt like we were old friends catching up over drinks. In fact, we have so much crossover and had so much to talk about that I found myself wondering if we were basically the same person. Even though she's a Canadian with Chinese heritage and I'm an American with German heritage, and she has a background in radio and voiceover while mine is in theater and music. Okay, we're not the same person. And okay, hooray for us, but what does any of this have to do with you? Well, let's talk about your voice. What do you use it for? Have you ever thought of your voice like an instrument that you could play with specific intention and different tonalities? Do you consider yourself to be a voice professional? Do you feel confident in your voice? Do you even like the sound of it? Well, if you speak, perform, podcast, teach, lead meetings, create content for YouTube or other social media channels, you are probably a voice professional, and your voice is an invaluable asset, or at least it can be with a little guidance. And that's a pursuit worthwhile and oh so interesting to both Mary and me. It's also the topic of a panel that we are co-presenting at the Podcasting for Business virtual conference this coming November 2024. Podcasting for Business is organized by Megan Doherty, who also was recently my guest here on The Creative Imposter. And you can still get tickets at bit.ly/CIPFBCon. That's a lot of letters, so we've linked it, of course, in the show notes for you, along with all things Mary Chan. And that topic is what we're exploring in the first half of this conversation for you. That topic again, voice. But that's not all we're talking about. You know that over the last few episodes, I've been exploring the question of whether podcasting matters, whether I'm in the right business, whether this is something I would ever recommend for anyone else to spend their time and resources and energy investing in. And, well, Mary's got some ideas for us on that too. Now, I'm trying something new in this episode, at least new to me and maybe new to you. And I could really use your feedback so I know whether it's worth it. This conversation was a little on the long side. I was having so much fun that I couldn't help myself. And when I went to edit it down for you, it was hard to find anything to cut. So I left a lot of juicy goodness in here for you. And since it is a little on the longer side, I marked it up with what are called chapters. Depending on what app you are using right now to listen, you may see something on your app screen that says Chapter Note. It's probably located underneath the cover art square. Take a look right now. And if you see it, Chapter Note, your app recognizes chapters, and you can easily tap forward and back between chapter headings. Think of this a little like a table of contents for this specific episode. What does that mean? If a particular topic that Mary and I are discussing isn't relevant or interesting to you, you can tap forward to the next chapter and pick and choose the parts of the episode that you will get the most value from. Or, of course, if you're like me, you want to hear all of the episode anyway, so this feature isn't necessarily for you. Now, if you look at your app screen and you don't see chapter note currently there, then your app may not support chapters. Wah, wah. And I would suggest that you consider trying out a different app like Pocket Casts, my current favorite listening app. And no, I am not an affiliate. And no, they are not paying me to say that. And yes, you can get Pocket Casts free. And Pocket Casts definitely supports chapters with a little arrow on the left and the right so that you can easily toggle back and forth. Now, if you are checking this out and you love using chapters and find it useful for the creative imposter, email me, Andrea@thecreativeimposter.com, and let me know so I'll keep doing it. Likewise, if you think this is a total waste of time, and yes, it does require a little extra time and organization on my side to create them, let me know that so I won't keep wasting time on it. Okay. That said, in this episode, Mary and I are sharing insights on whether your current voice, yes, the one that you use, is authentically yours. Why or why not? The intangible benefits of podcasting, whether podcasts need to be video, and if they are, how do you know they're a podcast and not just a YouTube channel? And some of the most challenging parts of entrepreneurship. Ahem, sales. And, well, here we go. My conversation with Mary Chan for you. This is really fun because I'm going to clue listeners in here. So Mary and I have been crossing paths in various ways in the podcasting world, and we actually appeared on an episode of Podcast Editors Mastermind together quite a while back, talking about developing your niche in terms of your podcasting business. I listen to Mary's podcast, I see stuff online, and I have never actually had the chance to just sit down and get to know you better as you, not just as podcasting professional.
Right.
So this is very exciting for me.
I know, same here when you asked and I was like, oh my gosh, yeah, we have never had like a proper one-on-one sort of a deal. So this is going to be great.
It's totally, what is that, parasocial relationship where I'm like, yeah, Mary and I go way back. We totally know each other. And then
I know,
I'm like,
right? No, wait, we don't.
I just actually want to start right away with something that you mentioned to me in the email when we were setting this up. You know, this podcast a lot of times focuses on how what we make affects who we are and how who we are affects what we make. And you mentioned that one of your big influences is the experience of growing up in a Chinese Canadian household with immigrant parents. And so I'm curious why that was what you wanted to bring up.
Yeah, when we talk about voice, okay, back up a little bit that I worked in radio for about 20 years. That was my first career path. That was what I wanted to do. And in that learning and growing in that career, I realized that, it's not something that naturally comes to people when they speak behind a microphone. It's weird to have this thing in front of your face and you are, speaking, but you're not really speaking because you're sort of performing at the same time. And I saw business owners come in and out of my studio. I made commercials, so I would help coach them on their voice on a script. And sometimes these business owners, they have no idea what they're doing. And they get bogged down on was I a little too high pitched there? Or, I speak way too fast. I speak that's I don't want to sound like that. And it was this the idea of we needed to sound quote unquote professional when we're behind the microphone. And transition now into the podcasting world that we're in, I saw those same things time and time again. And so in doing some of that inner work with myself, wondering, okay, why is this? Because I have some of those hangups too. Like when I started, I did not sound the way I do today. So what is that? And so in all my research, it was about how the voice you have today is not the voice that you were born with. So there are lots of influences through, media, things we watch on TV, currently other podcasters that we hear, but also very immediate in terms of your network, your community, your family, who you grew up with. How did they sound? Did you want to sound like them as well? Did you not want to sound like them? So my parents, being immigrant parents, and to answer your question, they came not knowing a lick of English. And so they had a heavy accent when they did speak. And when I went to school, being born in Vancouver, Canada, I didn't want to sound like my parents. I didn't want to be like, oh, you're a little kid. So you're like, oh, maybe I was thinking they're not smart or they're not like everyone else. They stand out.
Or people are going to think I'm weird.
Yeah, exactly. And so I wanted to be like my friends. I wanted to be like my teachers. I wanted to be maybe like the people I saw on TV. So I unconsciously honed my voice to not have an accent. I wanted to sound like my peers. And so I feel like that upbringing piece for myself personally changes how I speak today. Not just the physical voice, but also the little cultural aspects around that. Like the Chinese immigrant household, at least with my parents, they immigrated here with very different philosophies. They came from a very different culture from North America. And so I'm the youngest of three, and boys are more praised. And I'm a girl, and I'm the youngest. So the older siblings are also more praised. And so they always told me to just shut up, do your duty. You don't need to learn that. You're eventually going to just grow up, have a family, serve your husband. So I was always told to not have a voice. And that can really change how you feel about your voice and how you sound as an adult, because you still have those things from growing up telling you, ooh, that's not right. Ooh, you're high pitched. That's going to make you sound not smart. And, I am a tiny, tiny person, you can't tell in the virtual world, but I'm 5'1". And so as a kid, my voice was very high pitched and people were like, oh, you're so cute. And then I was like, oh no, growing up as an adult, I don't want to sound cute. I want to be an adult. How do I act like an adult? And then I realized that high pitchedness wasn't my natural voice. It was my outside influence of my family and my peers saying that I'm cute and I'm this and I'm that. So I emulated those things until I realized, oh, this is me. This is my voice. And this is who I am. And that's going to be okay.
Okay, so I feel like sometimes we tell these great stories, these origin stories, and there's always a moment, and I hear myself doing this too, where I say, and then I realized.
Oh,
and
yeah.
It's like, wait, you didn't just wake up and know it at some point in time. And I think also having worked with my voice, like I come from a musical background and a singing background. So I grew up singing in the church choir. I think my earliest memory of singing a solo was when I was 4 years old. And I sang for the mother and daughter banquet for my church. And I sang Tomorrow from Annie. I don't know why this memory sticks in my mind. And I'm not 100% sure it's accurate.
Right. But this is how we remember
This is the lore in my own mind. And I went from there, from singing in choir and singing solos and being in church to doing it in school and doing school musicals and getting into theater and acting and performing on stage. And so to me, knowing that your voice is an instrument or a tool that you can manipulate, not in a bad way, but you can manipulate it, you can train it, you can have it do different things. You can improve it. These are very natural to me from what my early childhood experiences were. And again, to your point, I received a lot of praise early on, being asked to sing in your church, being asked to do things, being offered opportunities, being told at the end of a service that you would sing a song and like, oh, your song, it really touched me, or, whatever. Like all of that for a child is like, yes, like all the dopamine, like reward centers, So for me to realize when I started working with podcasters and coaching them and new hosts who had not had this experience of being on the mic before, that they don't naturally know how to make their voice do a thing.
Mm-hmm.
So all of that is a very long-winded way of coming back to this question of what do you think? Do you know? Was it a series of events? Was it an experience? Was it something someone said? What caused you to have this realization that you had power? You could have power with your voice. You could do something different.
I decided to go to radio school. So out of high school, I'm like, radio was my thing. I loved radio because of that connection piece. Again, coming back from that immigrant household and trying not to be like my parents, I loved rock music. The rock radio station was my favorite. I always listened to it in the middle of school and high school and like not pay attention to the teacher. And I always felt like I knew the DJ. Like they were my friend.
Mm-hmm.
And I wanted to, I don't know, I guess I wanted that connection.
Yeah.
And when I did those high school questionnaires, it was, top 3. One of them was you could work in radio. And I was like, that could be a job. That's awesome. And in Vancouver, there was a program that I could take for 2 years. And I'm like, I guess I'll try this. And so in that program, I remember sitting in first year and it was a voiceover class and it was a demonstration with one of the instructors. And this instructor, I knew nothing about her, right? I'm totally new to the industry, but unbeknownst to us, she was well seasoned in the voiceover business. She worked in Toronto for many years and was a voiceover artist for many years. And so she was brought in to read the script. We had all read the script first, right? It was a script about like strawberries. You're selling strawberries on a farm, and it was a 30-second ad. We all did our own version. We're all like, yeah, we're good. Look at us. We can read this. And she came in, and the way that she just, again, not manipulation, but the way that she was able to convey the juiciness and redness of the strawberry and the wind and the breeze of the farm and all of these things. We literally were all jaw dropped, mouth opened, silence when she finished the commercial. And we were like, wow, how can we do that too? How is this possible? And then, she switches just back to her normal instructor Judith self. And we were like, that needs to be a thing. And then, so we all tried different things with our voices. And also now realizing too, that when I think about that high pitchiness that I was talking about, because I'm cute and young, that can still be used. That's still a part of who I am. And that can be part of being behind the mic. And that is part of your voice story. And so it's not about not ever being high pitched, because we need that when we're really excited about something. Or sometimes I call it like the puppy dog voice. When you're talking to a dog, you're like, oh, come here. Oh, yeah. Like you can still use that, right? So just being able to then realize in that whole 2-year radio school journey, and then also, like you said, it's never an overnight realization. Yeah. Working at my first full-time radio job, I was behind the mic every single day. First, from 10 to 2, hosting a show. And then after that, I voiced almost all the commercials at the radio station from 2 to 6 p.m. and editing them all. So I had a lot of usage of my voice and then being able to hear it every single day. That year at that one radio station really changed how I felt about my voice.
I've never worked in radio. I had friends that worked in radio. I went the film and video route and then somehow made my way to audio. Were you hearing yourself in your headphones as you were speaking and recording and broadcasting? or were you listening back after the fact, or both?
Both. Yeah. So you always monitor. So in radio terms, audio terms, we always monitor ourselves, meaning when you are recording, you always hear your own voice, because it's not just about hearing your own voice, but it's also about, am I clicking, tapping my pen? The microphone picks that all up. When business owners come in, they have keys or coins in their pocket and they're nervous, so they're jingling and jangling that. People with earrings and long hair, you can hear that clinking, or bracelets. So you want to be monitoring and hearing your voice and what your voice is doing, but also all the other things. And then after the fact, hearing yourself differently without the headphones, because that is also a different experience of hearing your voice, where it's not resonating within your skull and the bones and the resonance in your head when you actually hear it come out from your laptop speaker, or in radio, my alarm clock radio, right?
Yeah.
Like you hear things very differently and it's very nuanced, and you can be like, oh, I can just tweak my voice a little bit more this way, and it will just change the whole tone of what you're trying to say.
One of the things that I do in my work is I have a high school podcasting program, and we're mostly recording over the internet because it's a remote program. So they're not monitoring themselves. They don't hear themselves while they're recording.
Right.
But they do hear after the fact. And that is one of the biggest things, is they're like, oh my gosh, I sound so cringe.
Yes.
They're like, I can't listen to myself. This is so horrible. And, I liken it to, this is going to date me, but back in the days when answering machines were a new thing.
Yeah.
And you would have those little tiny micro cassettes that were inside the answering machine, and you would try to record like the answering machine greeting for your household. And I always wanted to do it, but then I would listen to the playback. And of course, the audio quality on those things was
terrible.
Wretched.
It's the same thing too. Like when I went to radio school, what we used to do was called air checks. Every time you were on the air, when you hit the on button for your microphone, it automatically clicked on the cassette tape recorder and it records your voice. So then you take that cassette tape at the end of your shift and you go to your instructor, and then you sit in the room and you get a critique right away and you listen to that. And again, like you said, the quality on a cassette tape is so terrible. And that's actually the first time I realized that high pitchiness in my voice. And I was like, that's how I sound. Because again, dating ourselves back in the day, we didn't have phones for us to record onto and have voice notes and all of that stuff and hit playback, or, recording videos of ourselves and just being goofy and listening back to it. We didn't have that access. So this was the first time in my, I was 18, 19 when I started this program. And I was like, oh, I sound like I'm 6. I don't want to sound like a 6-year-old. Why do I sound like a 6-year-old? Yeah, it's the listening back that even some of my clients today, they're like, oh, I can't listen back to it. No, I can't. And it brings up, I think, a lot of those childhood, or doesn't even have to be childhood. It could be a moment in your life where I know someone who was in the university setting, and they were told to come up to the front of the room in the lecture hall and present something. And the instructor was like, I can't hear you.
Oh,
Can
God.
you be louder, please?
Oh,
and that stuck with her forever.
Yeah.
And so she's like, I still feel really, I don't know, shy. And she's whispering and she's quiet because she's afraid of that feeling from back in the day.
Yeah. This is bringing to mind something that I've heard you talk about on your podcast, which of course will be linked in the show notes for everyone. But I've heard you talk about it, and it's something that I have thought a lot about, especially when working as an editor of other people's speech. Some people who have had a lot of practice and some people who have never, necessarily been part of an interview or been recorded before. And it also comes up with my high school students I work with who have disabilities as well. And they have very specific speech patterns or qualities to their voice that are not what we would consider necessarily to be like standard. Or I don't enjoy the whole NPR voice, like everyone needs to sound like they're on NPR kind of thing. I go back and forth between honoring and uplifting and respecting and celebrating someone's, quote, natural voice, both in terms of tonality and speech patterns. And if a teenager says like every 3 words,
Yeah.
do we leave that in? Do we tone it down? Do we coach them to not say like so often? Is there a problem with them saying like a million times? This comes up a lot with women with upspeak, primarily women. And upspeak, for anyone who isn't sure, is where when you're making a statement, a lot of times you end it like you're asking a question and the tonality goes up. And I'm exaggerating that a little bit, of course. But there are some people who use that more than others. And it drives some people crazy. And then other people say, well, it's the way people talk. Why is there a problem? So I'm kind of curious, how do you reconcile coaching someone to become a better, quote, speaker or podcaster and to be able to use their voice more effectively versus honoring somebody's natural speech patterns? How do you negotiate that?
That is a tough one. It really, really is, because although I do advocate for, sounding quote unquote natural, yourself, authentic, those buzzwords. But at the same time, we do have this air of the NPR voice and what I was saying before, the quote unquote professional voice. Even when I say that, I put on the deeper professional voice. Like it's just a thing in this Western world. And I think it comes down to knowing that things like saying like too much and upspeak, those were put upon us, especially as women, from a very old hierarchical system where, again, part of our upbringing and the generational part of our upbringing is we were always told that women's voice doesn't matter. We were always told to sit there and look pretty and serve your master. And so over those years, when we now speak, we still have that bit of upspeak because we're like, I'm not quite sure, because I've been told all these generations that you're not supposed to have an opinion.
Mm-hmm.
And so it just subconsciously comes up that we have this piece. And also, when women speak to each other, we tend to have more of those tonalities and vocal styles because we feel safer when we speak to each other. And so those things come up, and we know that we would not be as much judged by it. We are using it as a dialogue piece, because when you have a bit of upspeak, it's sort of also unconscious of you saying, do you understand what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Where if you have a conversation that's more in the masculine space, that upspeak could be portrayed as, you don't know what you're talking about, so I'm going to win this conversation.
Mm-hmm.
Because they were brought up in a world where they have to win. If they don't win, they will not survive. And they ruled the world, they made the decisions, so they have to win at all costs. And so knowing that piece and knowing that it's not a good or bad thing, it is just part of our world. But then judging that and figuring out when I use it, when I don't, to your question, is the tough part, because it really comes down to, for your podcast, what are you using your podcast for?
Mm-hmm.
If it really is to be in community with someone and it is to show someone that, hey, I'm like you, then you're going to need to leave some of those in. If you want to present it more as a NPR style podcast and you were really creating a factual, 6-part series on something that's very serious, you're going to want to take out some of those pieces to create that air of confidence.
Yeah.
But you're not always wanting to be confident when you're on a podcast. So it really does depend on the situation you're in.
Yeah. We identify so much of our identity with our voice. Like our voice is part of us. And there's another way of thinking about it, which is that it is a tool or an instrument in order to achieve an outcome. And so this just goes back to being able to be intentional about what it is that you're communicating to whom for what purpose in that moment, and being able to shift between those in the way that you're speaking or delivering something.
Yeah. And if you can even see that in some very powerful women as well, like Oprah. When she is doing her Oprah thing, she's on the ball. She doesn't have any of those vocal tics. She knows her next question because she's very passionate about what she's going to say and the whole theme around her, whatever she's doing. But if you ever watch an interview with her where she's just settling down with someone, or it's towards the end of the interview and it's more like cozy sit around the fire feel, she drops into her more natural voice, which has a bit of the creakiness in her voice. She's going to think about things a bit more and have those ums and ahs in there because it creates more of a vulnerable, safe, we are both in a safe dialogue now. So that intentionality piece is so key based on what you're doing.
Speaking of Oprah, never thought I'd make that segue. Speaking of Oprah, we are both currently finalists for the same award. What? Never thought I'd say that either. Okay, phew, at least we're not in the same category. My work is not up against Oprah's. However, both Oprah and the Creative Imposter Studios are finalists in the 2024 Signal Awards, and we need your help. Well, I don't know if Oprah needs your help, but we do. One of the shows that we have produced on behalf of our clients, the Del Sol Quartet, is a finalist in the category of artists and designers shaping culture. You can help us by voting for listeners' choice. I've made it as easy as humanly possible for you with a short link that will take you directly to the voting page for our category. Then all you need to do is click on Sounds Current, Angel Island, create a quick email login so that they can verify that you are you and not a bot, and be on your way. And you can vote for Oprah too if you want. Don't let me hold you back. She's a pretty good interviewer. The link for voting is at bit.ly/signal24ci. That's bit.ly/signal24. That's the numerals 24 CI. Again, that link is in the show notes for you. Voting is only open until October 17, 2024. So if it is before that day, please go vote for us. And if you've missed the voting window, no worries. We're still super grateful to be a part of the 2024 Signal Awards and deeply honored by the recognition. Quite honestly, even more so than voting for us, what I really want you to do is go listen to the podcast. That's Sounds Current by the Del Sol Quartet. It's the first season, Angel Island, and I put a link for you in the show notes as well. Give it a listen. Let me know what you think. It's probably one of my favorite things that I've ever made. At what point did you transition from radio to podcasting, and why?
Oh, it was not my decision.
Oh.
Yeah. So this was 2018. I was in a creative department and our whole department got downsized. And so you kind of sit and you cry and you're angry and then you're like, what am I going to do with my life? And after a while, I was already listening to a lot of podcasts. And I remember, my partner would come home from work and he'd say, oh, what did you do today? And I'm like, oh. But I listened to a couple of podcasts and, they're inspiring and all this stuff. And I was like, oh, but some of them I just can't continue listening to them because, I can either A, hear the edits, or B, they didn't do any editing and it's just going on a tangent. Or I could tell which microphone they're using. I could tell that they're recording in like an open office space with lots of glass doors. I could tell maybe they didn't know how to use the microphone and all of these things. And so he's like, why won't you just help them? And I had no idea what that meant. I'm like, what do you mean? Like, what? And he's like, start a business, work from home, see how that works out. And then, take it from there. Why don't you help people? And I was like,
yay, good husband.
Good husband, right? Because I didn't see it. I didn't know what to do. I knew that I wanted to work in audio. I just didn't know how. And he was the one that was like, go try it out. And so I was like, I don't know if this is a thing though. And then I started Googling and I'm like, oh, this is a thing. Oh, I know what I'm doing in terms of like audio editing, and people don't know that. Oh, I can help people. So my business started with just editing other people's shows. And it took me a little while to like accept that I'm not new to the podcast industry. I'm just bringing a different layer to the industry, and I can serve people and help people in a totally different way.
What did that feel like in the beginning of reaching out and finding your first few clients and sort of pitching yourself in this new identity?
Oh, I felt like that little 6-year-old girl voice again. It came back and I was like, hi, I can sort of help you with that. I think you could probably do this. And then they're like, okay, how much do you want for that? This sounds great. I'm like, oh, I don't know. I've always just had a salary. They were said, this is what you got paid. Great. I'm like, okay, I'll take it. Money. Yay. So I fought a lot with the money piece of running your own business, and that confidence of, yes, I do know what I'm talking about. This does work. And it took a few clients, and that first client, we still work together on different projects, on different audio projects. And she's so lovely because in the end, I was just so honest with her. I was like, you're my first client. I know what I'm doing on the technical front, but if you give me some leeway, like I'll just charge you this.
Mm-hmm.
Very small, pitiful amount. So
right. Yeah. The amount that shall not be repeated.
Yes. and we'll take it from there. And she was so great too, because she also runs her own business, right? So she was so great at saying, okay, let's do this. Let's give this relationship a try. And then anytime I did something else, she's like, you can charge me for that. I was like, oh, I can? And she's like, yep, just send me an invoice. Let me know. I'm like,
we love those clients who are coaching us in our business as we go.
Yes.
So from 2018 to 2024, what does your business, Organized Sound Productions, what does that look like now? Like, what are you doing? How many clients are you working with? Tell me more.
It ranges from helping people launch podcasts to editing to management and support. And I've got a couple contractors now. So like we do the writing, we do all the post-production in terms of, the audiograms and publishing and scheduling, all the fun things, and really honing in on, back when we were on that episode together with Podcast Editors Mastermind, we were talking about niche. And even in the last month, I've niched a little bit further, where before I was very proud of, supporting women because we don't have a voice, or we didn't for a very long time. And I remember working in the radio business, and it was always like the men would come in with their ego and be like, yeah, I can do this. And they voice it. And then they're like, that was great. And I'm like, no, can we try that again? And, they may or may not take the ones that did not take my advice. I was like, oh, I don't want to work with those people. Now that I can control and choose who I want to work with, I made women as the niche at that time. And so now in the last month or two, I've realized now that niche is I'm here to empower underrepresented individuals and organizations who are doing good in the world to build a community of belonging.
That's good.
Because for me, that's what podcasting is all about. We are building these little communities, whether they are big or small. You are sharing your voice with someone, and that person who's listening, your listener's like, oh, I see myself in you. And that is the start of a community.
What is working really well for you right now, besides this like uncovering of this specific niche that obviously you're very passionate about and fired up about? I don't like that phrase, fired up. I wish I didn't use that. It's like, what are all those podcasting phrases that I'm like, oh God, don't say deep dive. Don't say deep dive.
I say that one a lot. I say that one a lot. And it is also a cringe moment every time I say it. Or I write it and then I'm like, oh, can we not use that phrase?
Correct.
Ugh.
But aside from these little podcasty cliche phrases that we are avoiding, what is going really well for you in your business? What has you excited and feels really good?
The variety of work that I get to do. We have weekly shows, but I'm also working on a 6-part series We're also working on audiobooks. We edit audiobooks as well. There's all these little pieces that come together so nicely. And sometimes I feel like, oh, there's too many projects on the plate because they're not all the same. When they are all the same, there's an easy workflow and checklists, but I like the variety and spice in life. And so I've got all of these different things happening, yet I still feel very grounded in what I'm doing and that things are being checked off. And I'm like, oh, I'm going to do this. Okay, this is great. And I have things lined up even until January.
Audiobooks, podcasts, are you doing all audio right now, or is anyone pressuring you to do video? How are you feeling about video in the podcasting space at this moment?
Video. I totally understand it. I get it. Like everybody pushes for video because YouTube is huge. People are using it for podcasts more because YouTube is now changing their strategy and focusing on podcasts. And so everyone's like, well, if YouTube's focusing on podcasts, we need video and this and that. And I get it. But coming from a radio background where we were mostly audio, there is a difference and you need to have a totally different strategy when it comes to video. So what is that focus for you? If you want to focus in on that building a community, which is what audio does, you don't have that distractor. When you have that conversation with someone, or even when you're doing that solo bit, that audio piece is so key for your listener because they can then take that audio with them wherever they're going. You can talk about prostate cancer, which is very private. And maybe you're not sure if you have that, but you're on your commute, you're on the bus, you're on the train, you're in your car, and you're like, I need to learn more about this. But I don't have the time to read a book. I don't have time to sit there and research. I don't have time to look on YouTube and then hit play. I just want to listen while I'm going and doing my thing when I'm at the gym. It's that really intimate piece that you can be with someone when they're listening, they're in the bathroom. That's what I use a lot. Who here takes their phone in the bathroom? I am raising my hand. Who else can say that you are in a room with them when they're in their most intimate, private space?
I know. I said that to somebody once. I listen to you while I'm in the shower, and they were like, I don't know how I feel about that.
But that's why it's such a connector, because you feel like you're in that room with the person. You feel like you know the person. I mean, so there are a lot of podcasts that I listen to myself as a listener. I'm spending more time with them than I am with my own family. Right? That's a lot of time. I don't call my mom that often, but there's this one podcast I listen to once a week, like there is that intimate piece that video will never be able to hit. And so if you want video to help grow your business, to help grow the podcast in a different way, and you have the resource and the capacity for that, awesome. I'm not the person to work with, but I know some people, so I can lead you that way and make sure that the video at least is going to be just as good as the audio, because where you can't just publish Zoom stuff and then be like, I'm going to be the greatest in the world. That's not going to cut it. So if you want to do video, you also have to do it right.
It's so interesting because my high school students, they almost exclusively consume podcasts on YouTube.
Yes.
I had a student say, because she sent me a podcast recommendation of a show that she likes. And I was like, oh, I haven't heard of this one. I want to check it out. She sent me the YouTube and the Spotify. And I was like, I'm curious, do you watch this on YouTube or do you listen to it on Spotify? Okay. And she's like, both, depending on where I am and what I'm doing. But I recommend the YouTube one so you can see their facial reactions because it's really funny.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh.
Yeah, because I do have some clients who are like, I want my face to be known. I'm like, okay, then maybe you want to do a YouTube channel thing. You don't really want a podcast.
Right. And then I go to the question of like, if it's on YouTube and it's video first, is it a podcast or is it a YouTube channel?
Right. Those lines are totally blurring and the industry doesn't know either.
Correct.
And I've asked people that too. I'm like, what do you consider a podcast? Like, it's not for me to say what's a podcast. What are you considering a podcast? And they're like, well, if they have a microphone, that's a podcast,
Correct.
Right? So it doesn't matter anymore, but it's what are you doing with that platform?
Yeah.
That's the key. Personally, for me, I don't like consuming as much on YouTube because of that convenience factor, right? Like I'll hit play. I've not paid for a premium account.
Correct.
So if I turn off my screen, it stops. That's annoying. Most of the time, I'm actually not watching the video if I'm listening to something on YouTube. So I'm going to have to leave the screen on. I'll put it in my pocket and go on my walk or whatever, but I'm never still going to look at what YouTube is. For me, YouTube is also, I need to sit down and make space for that to watch. I'm not going to watch that while I'm doing dishes.
Given that you have this amazing business, Organized Sound, you also have a podcast that we have not talked about at all yet, which is The Podcaster's Guide to a Visible Voice. I know for me in my business, I love creating my own show here, what we're doing right now in this moment. I love hosting. And sometimes, no, all the time, I'm very inconsistent and I'm a little bit chaotic with my production schedule and I don't always have an episode every week. This podcast was on hiatus unexpectedly for 2 years because I just didn't have time, one, and I didn't know what direction I wanted to go, so I just stopped.
Yeah.
And sometimes I'm also not really sure how this podcast fits into, like, I can't justify not spending time on client work when I don't really make money off of this and I don't really know if it's helping my business or not. Like, I did get a couple of my early clients from this show, but none of my recent clients have come because of this podcast. They're all through personal network, word of mouth, recommendation, and referral. So I'm like, okay, so this then is a hobby? I don't know. So I'm curious for you, how does your podcast fit into your overall ecosystem of what you're creating? What does it do for you? Why do you keep doing it?
Yeah, same. Very many same feelings. Same. And also, side note, I did miss your podcast when it was not around. I was like, where's Andrea? Hasn't had
See,
any
this is the
show.
thing. I had no idea you were listening to my podcast.
It's the lovely thing about podcasting. You can do it all in secret. Although, do leave feedback for your host because we do appreciate it. So there's my feedback piece for you. I did miss you. But yeah, I go through spurts of that too, where I'm like, what is this doing for me? I don't have time for this because my focus is on client work. I'm very much an outer accountability type of person. And so if the client and I set a deadline on something, then I'm on it. No problem. I can do those deadlines. But self-accountability, it's like, is it really that important? I'll just move it down later. I mean, I just set the deadline myself anyway, so I can just move it, right? And so when I hired a post-production VA for the client work, I then also said, hey, now that you know how to do all these things, would you like to tack on my podcast as well? Because I don't, like you said, I don't get paid to do this. It's just marketing dollars. My podcast is a piece of my marketing. So I'm paying this contractor in my marketing budget. But to your point about what is it doing for me? My last few clients were referrals, like same thing. But at the same time, they're still going to Google stalk you. They're going to figure out who you are. And so a lot of the times they'll say, oh yeah, so-and-so recommended. And I listened to your podcast and you sound exactly like your podcast. This is great. Okay. Like I learned so much just listening from your show. Yeah. So I'll hear people say things like, yeah, you sound like you're right there. How do I do that? And so that's what the podcast is mostly used for. That's the number one goal, is to get clients, get work. But also I use it to figure out what I'm trying to say. And so, for example, in November, we will both be on a panel for Podcasting for Business, the conference. We're going to talk about voice. And although I talk about voice a lot already, I wanted to create one of my solo episodes to really distill down more of the key points of what I want to say. And so that solo episode that I'm still figuring out now, I will then use those points to talk about when we're at the conference.
Especially, I was thinking about, because there's going to be 3 of us on that panel. And I was looking at the breakdown that Megan, who was recently on this show, sent us. And I was like, oh, we're each going to have about tops like 10 minutes.
Yeah.
To present something. And the rest is going to be like Q&A and discussion. And I'm like, am not short. I am long-winded.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. As we know right now.
I don't do TikTok. I don't do
Yeah.
like Instagram reels are really hard for me. I take a long circuitous path to get to a point.
Yeah.
And I'm like, 10 minutes. That's hard.
So we're going to have to figure out what we want to say anyway. So why not use that as well as content and showing people how we're thinking in the back of our minds and stuff like that, and honing in on that presentation or workshop or what have you. I have a client who does the same thing where she said, you know what? I don't get a lot of downloads, but what I love about having this podcast is that I'm figuring out my voice.
Mm-hmm.
I am finding out what I like, what I don't like. She does a lot of workshops and presentations too. And so she'll go into a solo episode with that mindset. Not just a solo episode, but interviewing guests so that she knows, hey, I can use this as research. You know, she takes some of what they're saying to put into her workshop. So she's like, I don't know how much this costs because I'm trying, I don't want to know, but I know it's a lot of money, but it's so well worth it, even though I don't have a lot of downloads.
Yeah, I have one client who she frequently says on her podcast in her intros to her listeners, if y'all want to buy some merch or donate to my Patreon, I would really appreciate that because our editing services from Andrea at the Creative Imposter Studios are not cheap. They're worth every penny, but they're not cheap.
Yes.
And it would really help us out. And I'm like, stop saying that.
Oh my gosh. But it is a large chunk of their operating budget, right? So it's about, okay, what do you get out of this? And on my podcast, I have an episode on the intangible values of a podcast. And we do talk a lot about this. And, you know, one of the things that another client of mine, she wanted to be a thought leader in her space. So she created this podcast. She does workshops and presentations as well. So she uses it to figure out her talking points. And not even 30 episodes in, I believe, she was ranked in her industry in this industry-wide report for the year, one of the top 5 podcasts to listen to.
Wow.
Right? And so now her downloads have skyrocketed, but she was never about the downloads anyway. She wanted to support and help more people, but because of the download numbers that are higher, she's growing her network, she's getting more guest requests. She is really thinking more about, okay, who do I want on this show now? Who do I want to serve? And how can I serve them better? And that changes the trajectory of her business as well.
What's challenging you right now?
The challenge will always be being comfortable with the sell. Again, it's part of using your voice. And I'm still on that learning journey of selling. And also because working in radio, there was a whole sales department and we always called them the sleazy salespeople.
Oh, no.
And so I'm trying to distance myself and learning what that means now for selling for myself. So it's always going to be this learning journey of how to run my business in a way that is true to myself and not let all those preconceived notions that I've grown up with take over and say, oh, that was then, this is now. How do I want to keep going? So even I'm still learning my voice and my message. That is always, I think, going to be the challenge.
Same. I feel like everything that you're saying, I'm like, yes, me too. Yes, sales. Yeah. I had a former client who is a sales trainer and consultant. I used to edit his show and take in this sales stuff that feels so counterintuitive to me. And one of the most brilliant things that he said that I hold in my heart every time I'm trying to sell something, he's like, whenever you present your solution, first of all, what you're selling is a solution, which I like that framing. I am here to solve a problem for you. I'm not here to sell you a thing. I'm here to solve a problem.
Yep.
And he said, when you present your price, you say, the price is, you give the number, and then you stop talking. It's so simple. It's so simple. Why is this so hard?
Because then we get all the little gremlins in our head saying, don't forget about this. And are you really worth that? And there's all these other factors. So It's so hard. And also, like, I realized too that in sales, the thing that really resonated with me with the whole podcast side is one of the main things I have the podcast is so that I can do less sales.
Yeah.
Because people will then hear, they do that Google stalking I was talking about, they'll hear you. And there were quite a few times where I will have a discovery call with someone and I don't know, 10 minutes, 15 minutes in, and they're already like, okay, yeah, how can I do this? How can I do this? Where do I pay? And we haven't even talked price at all. It was just, yep, I'm in. How do I pay? How do I make this happen?
Mm-hmm.
Right at the end of the call, I'll send them a proposal with the different packages so that they can choose what will best fit for their capacity and what they need. Most of the time, they finish that proposal so quickly and they've already paid a deposit. And I'm just like, how did that happen? I'm still like, sometimes, how did that happen? I'm like, right. They talked about how they heard me on the podcast. Yeah, this one person works for a nonprofit organization. I was on vacation. While I was on vacation for 2 weeks, well, they Googled, they wanted podcast support. They found me, saw my website, listened to my podcast, booked the call with me, came back from vacation. The call was like the first day I got back from vacation. We chatted for the 30 minutes with her and her team. And yeah, right away, they're like, send us the stuff. We want in. How do we make this happen? I was just like, again, how? And it still boggles my mind. Like, that all worked? Like, how did that all work? So, from starting the business in 2018 to now, we've put in a lot of foundations and things that we hoped would pay off. And in the last year, 2 years, I would say all of that stuff is paying off for me. Like, people are saying, yeah, your website or your podcast, on top of now as well, the referrals.
That's awesome.
Yeah. I forget to celebrate that sometimes.
Is there anything that is coming up for you in your mind that is something that you really would like to share with the Creative Imposter audience?
Well, because of the creative imposter, the imposter syndrome that we all have, and that it is okay, we just need to, work through it. What does that mean to you? And so that comes back to listening back to yourself. Whether you have a podcast or not, like I said, we're now in an age where we all have these lovely devices attached to our hip constantly. Record yourself. Talk about your day if you don't have a podcast. Talk about what you're going to be doing next week. It could be something as simple as that. And then listen back. But when you listen back, to not go directly to that judging, the critiquing, the, oh my gosh, I'm sounding like this now. And why did I squeak like that? How did that happen? Take that out of it. But think of yourself, if you were a friend listening to this piece of audio, what would that friend say? Because I bet you 100% your good friend is not going to say, oh, you squeaked right there. That sounded terrible.
And if so, you need new friends.
Totally. So thanks for that. Listen with a discerning ear. What would your friend say? Don't listen just for how your voice is coming out, but what is that message? What is that bit of passion that's in your voice? What is it that you loved? What is it that you're like, oh, that's a cool phrase I used? Jot that one down, write it down. When you write things down, and you actually remember it in your brain much better. So make some notes. Make little love notes for your voice.
Ooh.
Not for you, for your voice.
I love that. Love notes for your voice.
Mm-hmm.
What would you write in a love note to your voice? No, don't tell me. That's between you and, well, you. I do hope, however, that if you are a podcaster or aspiring podcaster or content creator of any kind, you'll check out Mary's show, The Podcaster's Guide to a Visible Voice, and consider joining us for the Podcasting for Business Conference 2024. Links are in the show notes. And psst, what did you think of those chapter markers in this episode? Did you use them? Let me know in a love note to me at Andrea@thecreativeimposter.com. This podcast was produced and edited by Andrea Klunder. That's me. Our theme music is by Jovia Armstrong. Thank you so much to Mary Chan. And this week, be kind to that voice of yours and see how you can get to know it just a little bit better.